So the ruler, it's not really, we wouldn't necessarily call this a regent. The star cluster doesn't have a regent, but it's basically Nergal, who is the god of war, death, and pestilence in the underworld, also synonymous with Mars. So again, when the Babylonians looked up, or the Sumerians, they looked at the stars, they believed that that was the actual deity floating around in the sky, whereas the constellations themselves, they were just images. So it was like they wrote out the sky, above the firmament. And it wasn't a flat earth thing. I'm just saying, like, the heavens. And then whatever they were doing in the sky, those were our messages, right? Which we all understand that concept as astrologers. Okay, there are some solar connotations. I'm going to talk a little bit about those to really understand what's going on with the Pleiades, which is very important, you guys. If you can look at this, I know I didn't hear any of you guys bring it up. I don't know in Vedic astrology at this point if they do anything with the Pleiades, if that's one of the nakshatras, I don't know. Meg's giving me a head shake, so I'm going to assume that's the case. But powerful, powerful information with the Pleiades, you guys, okay? So, let me see here. All right, so the Era epic is known as Shar Gimr Dadme, has a lot of different names. It's basically the Era epic. There's 36 copies that have been found, more than the Epic of Gilgamesh. Okay, so this was an extremely important text. This is from Benjamin Foster's Distant Days, okay? Keep in mind when you're listening to this, they're talking about these seven gods, but they sound like, well, you guys, we'll see if you can pick up what they sound like. When Anu, king of the gods, sowed his seed in the earth, she bore him 7 gods. He called them the 7. He summoned the first to give his instructions. Wherever you go and spread terror, have no equal. He said to the second, burn like fire, scorch like flame. He commanded the third, look like a lion. Let him who sees you be paralyzed with fear. He said to the fourth, let a mountain collapse when you present your fierce arms. To the fifth, he said, blast like the wind, scan like the circumference of the earth. The sixth he enjoined, go out everywhere like the deluge and spare no one. To the seventh, he charged with viperous venom, slay whatever lives. Okay, I don't know if you guys picked this up. We're going to see this almost identical description listed in the Epic of Gilgamesh, but these sound almost identical to different descriptions throughout human civilization of comets or celestial fragments falling to the earth and basically like devastating mountains, causing floods, all kinds of stuff. This is important. So there's a lot of negativity around the Pleiades in the Amina tradition. I suspect this is a direct result of, I think we talked about this in the last lesson. The earth passes through the tail of a comet twice a year. It's called the Taurid meteor shower. The reason it's called Taurid meteor shower is because it originates from the constellation of Taurus. If you don't know, Taurus would have been, well, right between that void portion between Taurus and Gemini. That's where the sun would have been rising on the eastern horizon, right around the time of the end of the last ice age. So we have a lot of different associations with 7. The 7 Pleiades in particular in very, very ancient culture all over North America, South America, into Asia, with the 7 being associated like with some sort of magic and destruction in the beginning of time, like the end of the last world and the beginning of the new world. So something definitely was going on as far as the 7 are concerned. So from the Epic of Gilgamesh, the 7 warriors, they were sons of, what's going on here? So Gilgamesh is basically going on a journey, and Utu, the sun god, which is where the solar associations with the Pleiades come in. He's going to give the 7 to Gilgamesh to help him here, and it's going to explain. 7 warriors they were, 7 of one mother. These 7, the warriors, the hero Utu Shamash, gave Gilgamesh. The first, the eldest, has lion's paws and eagle's talons. The second is an open-mouthed cobra. The third, a dragon serpent hurling. The fourth spits fire. The fifth can seize. The sixth, a torrent in spate that batters the mountains. The seventh blasts like lightning none can deflect. In the heavens they shine. On the earth they know the paths. In the heavens they are the stars blazing on high. On earth they know the road to Arata. Merchants they know the pathways. Like pigeons they know the nooks and crannies of the mountains. Through the mountain passes let them guide you. Now this goes back to the Pleiades being like one of the most important constellations for navigation, again through for time immemorial. So we get some of that like destructive nature as well as the guiding element. Okay, so in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Shamash is giving Gilgamesh the 7 to him. The guidance of the sun god is going to be a recurring theme. So this is one of the things I was talking about. Even though we're not technically doing the planets yet, pay attention to this stuff because it's giving you all the clues to what the planets do. Strangely enough, guidance, even though that's one of the main things that Utu, the sun god, does, he's not, like, if you look him up, it's not going to say, oh, he's a god of guidance and protection and all of this. You actually have to read the myths for some reason. It's also worth mentioning that in the Era epic, which is the one I told you about, where Jupiter leaves his order and his orbit and causes the deluge, the Pleiades are the driving force coaxing Era Nergal, the planet Mars, into war. So this is from a translation from Stephanie Daly, or Daly, however you want to say it. They were indeed fierce, and their weapons rose up. They said to Era, rise, stand up. Why do you stay in town like a feeble old man? How can you stay at home like a lisping child? Are we to eat women's bread like one who has never marched onto the battlefield? Are we to be fearful and nervous as if we have no experience of war? To go into battle or go onto the battlefield is as good as a festival for young men. That's what they called battle. They called it the dance of Inanna or festival for young men. They had other names too. Now, they almost certainly did this out of their own selfish gain. Okay, so from Foster, we hear a translation. The Pleiades say, the seven say, we too, who know the mountain passes, we have forgotten how to go. Cobwebs are spun over our field gear. Our fine bow resists and is too strong for us. The tip of our sharp arrow is bent out of true. Our blade is corroded for want of a slaughter. So if we had any doubt about the aggressive masculine traits of the Pleiades, Venus is said to wear a beard when near the Pleiades. If you don't know, Venus was sometimes described as male, depending on if she was the morning or evening star. We have conflicting information. We don't know which one she was. It was either, like, some say it was evening, some morning. Her wearing a beard is a reference to her taking on the more aggressive warlike traits when she's in Taurus, but namely by the Pleiades. So factor this in, or don't if you don't want to, but I'm telling you it works. When you have Venus close to the Pleiades, it's a potential for some more of Venus's petulant, aggressive traits that come up. All right, so yes, notes, they're tiny. All right, now the Pleiades weren't all bad. They were, but they weren't. You know, they were weapons and they were doing their thing. This was what they were meant to achieve, right? From the state archives of Assyria, we hear things like, may the Pleiades, the heroic gods, smite you down with their fierce weapons. They're still heroic, right? On your left is great Era, strongest one of the gods. In front of you go the valiant Pleiades. So they're still destroying, but now they're valiant, they're courageous. So they're all the good things that we associate with warriors. And, you know, if we were like in a culture that worshipped war and battle and whatnot. Okay. They did have some good omens. So if the Pleiades, the seven, the great gods, rise at their appropriate time, the great gods will gather and make a favorable decision about the land. Sweet winds will blow. So that's another reference to, they had a solar calendar, a lunar calendar, and if the stars and everything lined up with their calendars, everything was good. But when things started to go a little wonky, because obviously the solar and lunar calendars don't match up over time, they're going to drift farther and farther apart. Then, you know, things were not so great. And again, this comes from Babylonian astrology, not necessarily Sumerian. So just keep that in mind. When we consider this, for all the reasons listed above, the Pleiades astrological associations include war, aggression, coercion, ego, violence, destruction, courage, valor, strength, victory, power, masculine energy, guidance, navigation, searching, and adventure. So I suspect none of you have ever used the Pleiades in a reading. I'm just going to go out on a limb, right? Try it out. Let me know how it goes. Okay. Factor it in. Now if you don't have, if your program that you're using doesn't allow you to do it, I mean, you may need to jump on Stellarium, but definitely look into it. It's interesting. Okay. All right. So, this image is courtesy of Pastor Amelia. The image found in the Hall of the Bulls in Lascaux, France, depicts the 7 stars just above the shoulder of the bull, almost identical to the Mesopotamian depiction of Taurus. In fact, another image, which I couldn't find a clear one, which is why I didn't stick it on here, you actually see the sun. It's going to be right over here in this area, moving into the horns of the bull. There's quite a few of those. Now, this image has been visible in the morning skies, the exact one with the sun in that place, 12,000 to 10,000 years ago. You guys, literally like right at the end of the late Pleistocene. So I don't think this is a coincidence at all. This particular cave art has been dated to 15 to 1300 BCE, although some have speculated that it may go back 30,000 years. I don't know if it's that image in particular, just the cave art in Lascaux in general. All right, speaking of this bull of heaven, we can assume the regent to be Anu. There may even be, like it may actually say Anu, I'm not 100% sure, but basically the bull was all Anu. All right, let me see here. Okay, so the word gu for the Sumerian word refers to an intact domestic ox or bull. They were prized for their strength and virility and their ability to feed a ton of people in one go, which is why they were exceptionally valuable and thus a symbol of wealth. Bull's horns were associated with divinity and kingship since as far back as we know. Okay, at least as far as the age of Taurus, but probably way farther back. Many ancient gods were depicted with bull's horns or being referred to as a bull. As a matter of fact, in Numbers 24:8, God who brought Israel out of Egypt has horns like a wild ox. He destroys nations who oppose him. He crushes their bones. So when you read the Old Testament, which is fun, there's a lot of bull imagery. They refer to El and sometimes Yahweh as this, fertile, fecund bull. So this is just a common theme throughout mythology. They were just very masculine and powerful and, divine. Both male and female deities could wear the horns in and outside of Mesopotamia. Outset or Isis, her Greek name Isis, I'm sure you guys are familiar, was depicted with bull's horns with the solar disc on the inside. Very similar to the image in the Hall of Bulls, actually. And of course, female cows have horns too, guys. I don't know if you know that, but they definitely do. Aside from the obvious associations with strength and divinity, bulls were also associated with rain and storms, which we're going to touch on in the next slide here. So let me see, what else did we want to tell you? Yes. Okay, about this bull in particular, his name was Gugulana, the bull of heaven. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, Inanna declares, she basically wants to marry Gilgamesh. He says no because everything she loves, something bad happens to it. At least that's what she says. So Inanna declares, let my father give me the bull of heaven so I can kill Lord Gilgamesh. Great An replied to holy Inanna, my child, the bull of heaven would not have any pasture as its pasture is on the horizon. He's talking about the sun rising in the east, the Gugulana rising in the east, just so you guys know. Maiden Inanna, the bull of heaven, can only graze where the sun rises, which does speak to when this text was probably written. In masculine fashion, the maiden Inanna grasped it by the lapis lazuli tether. Holy Inanna brought the bull of heaven down. With each slurp, it used up 1 mile of the river, but its thirst was not satisfied. It devoured the pasture and stripped the land bare. It broke up the palm trees of Uruk, and it bent them to fit into its mouth. When it was standing, the bull submerged Uruk, but its thirst was not satisfied. It devoured the pasture and stripped the land bare. So then Gilgamesh says to the bull, they will throw your corpse in the deserted streets and throw your intestines in the broad square. They will send your carcass to the knackers, and I shall share out your meat in baskets to the widow sons who are citizens of my city. I will make flasks of your 2 horns for pouring fine oil to Inanna in Eanna, which is the temple. Gilgamesh himself smote its skull with his axe, weighing 7 talents. The bull reared up so high that it overbalanced. It splattered like rain. It spread itself out like the harvest crop. The king took his knife in hand just as if he were a master chef. He hit Inanna with a haunch. He made her flee away like a pigeon and demolished those ramparts. I'm standing by the bull's head. The king wept bitter tears. Okay. A lot of things going on in here. We see that the bull, as a servant of Anu, has to serve. He's not necessarily just this wild monstrous creature. He's going down here because the God of heaven is demanding it. Just by his nature, he's eating, he's consuming, okay? We do see with Taurus, and definitely look into this when you guys are like doing your readings. There is a desire to consume. On the one hand, sometimes it is food, and we see this overlap in the classical associations of like sometimes Taurus being very decadent and like, really fancy stuff and food on top of it, desserts and whatnot. I have found, and I'm going to explain why in the next slide, that this is much more of a cognitive consumption than anybody really gives it credit for. It's kind of one of the overlooked things that comes in. Not just is the bull, serving, he's also sacrificed, but through his sacrifice, his body is going to feed the orphans and the widows and the people in need. So he's not just dying in vain. Obviously it sucks, but Taurus, because of this, ends up with a lot of selflessness. Yes, it can be very strong in overly maybe confident sometimes, but there's much more spiritual service underlying strong Taurus in a chart. Okay. Not always, not every, if you're clearly, well, I don't want to say that. Even, somebody who's like an atheist or somebody, a lot of times they can still be very generous. And even if they don't equate that to doing spiritual work, they still are, whether they want to call it that or not. Okay. In the descent of Inanna, which we're not going to go into too much, but I do want to just bring it up. Inanna tells the chief doorman of the underworld that she's traveled to the land of no return because Lord Gugulana, the husband of my sister Holiaresh Kigal, has died, and in order to have his funeral rites observed, she offers generous libations at his wake, and that is the reason. This is important because the descent of Inanna is one of the most celebrated. It's basically like the first ever epic poem. So we're going to talk about it later, but I'm just bringing it up here. So the bull's death actually triggers this whole other epic that we're going to talk about. So when we factor all of this in, the constellation of Taurus becomes associated with strength, vitality, fertility, divinity, kingship, divine service in particular. You're not always going to see it. It's obviously going to depend on some other things going on in the chart, but it's definitely there. I can tell you pretty much 100% of the people that have strong Taurus in a chart, they have this almost like a compulsive, if not self-destructive need to help and serve. Okay. And also consumption, and we're going to talk about this here in just one second. Let me slide. The bull's jaw. So in the Pleiades, which are the pointy bull, I don't know, I don't have a real picture in here. The little, where the horns of the bull are pointing out, there's Aldebaran in the two little spikes that are sticking out. That's basically what we're talking about with the bull's jaw. So An or Anu, whose name means heaven or cosmos, is the supreme celestial deity and the lord of the bull of heaven, and kind of fixed, you can't really see it here, but basically Aldebaran, the star, is like his crown. Okay, this is like one of his thrones or his crowns where he's executing a lot of his power. Because of this, and you'll see this with conjunctions with Aldebaran, you do get much more of that divine service, as opposed to like maybe if you have something closer to the Pleiades, you're going to get a little bit more of the aggressive side, where here it's going to really manifest as being much more spiritual. All right, let me see here. So An was the supreme celestial deity, not unlike the current understanding of a very impersonal divine father, which we're all familiar with, right? In the oldest tradition, he has no ancestors. He rarely participates in human affairs. And in many ways, he is akin to like the standard, supreme deity. He's rarely depicted in artwork. And of course, in Babylonian record, he's slain by Marduk and like imprisoned in the underworld because Marduk just did, like he just conquered all of the gods and did all of the things. And again, this is in the late Babylonian period, so we don't really put too much stock into it, okay? His consort was Ki, which means the earth, which comes in, becomes very important here soon. And the Sumerian word Anki can translate as heaven and earth or the universe or existence. So if you hear An or Ki, that's what's going on. Now, we need to talk about Adad. So he was a Mesopotamian storm or rain deity. His sacred animal was the bull. He was often pictured wearing a horned helmet and a headdress and holding a thunderbolt, which looks suspiciously like the two Pleiades parts of the constellation that are sticking out. So they would have these images of bulls with the little Pleiades things kind of like sticking out of his back. His sacred animal, oh, I said that already, hold on. He probably is the Canaanite Baal, just so you guys know, if you're into that. When Enki was decreeing fates and destinies, Enki made him, Adad, the inspector of the cosmos. From the state archives of Assyria, may Adad, the canal inspector of heaven and earth, deprive him of rain, so this is a curse, from heaven and of the seasonal flooding from the underground water. May he destroy his land through famine, roar fiercely at his city, and turn his lands into ruin by means of a flood. And as we can see here, Adad is capable of holding back or causing rain and floods. In one text, it was said of him, great radiant bull, your name is heaven, which is basically saying like this bull of heaven is also kind of like Adad also. Yes, in some cases, he was listed as the son of Anu. Basically, what's going on with the Adad and the bull's jaw is a deeper connection to water, rain, and fertility. So again, if you don't remember from the last lesson, fresh water, rain, semen, they're all the same stuff. It's all the same word. It all has the same meaning. So it's very sexual. That's why we have all this like, bull energy being very virile and just, intense masculine energy. But also this is bringing creativity and life to the land. It's not just raw aggression. There's a deeper purpose behind it. Yes, in fact, all creation in Mesopotamia came from water. It's the most creative. I don't know. Is there creative? Is that also the creative? And like the classical Greek, would we say water is the creative element, or would we say that? I don't know. No, I'm getting mixed results over here. I'm not sure. All right, I don't know anymore, you guys. Even in the Enuma Elish, which is the Babylonian epic of creation, Tiamat, who is the salt water, and her consort Absu, who is the fresh water, they intermingled and basically created, like, they were the stuff of, the cosmos, and they're describing it as water. All right, so the Sumerian word gishda can translate as with a writing board, providing additional insight into the cognitive nature of a dad in Taurus. There's also a Mercury association here. Mercury in the kidney stars, it was sometimes called, they have a lot of omens related to Mercury and rain and water and storms and floods. So even though it's not a direct association, Taurus does have very strong Mercurian traits. And anytime we are dealing with something with water, like even with Enki and fish and even Pisces, we still see those strong Mercury traits. Now, that's not a normal association. Most people don't associate like Pisces with Mercury. It's in there, you guys. It's definitely in there. You have to kind of read between the lines a little bit, but it's there. Okay, so of course, the nature of Adad as a cosmic inspector speaks to his desire to seek out details and information, making Taurus much more cognitive than most people realize, taking into consideration that many of the omens, yeah, I just said that, okay. So one of those omens would be the observation of Mercury is impending. There will be heavy rain and thunder. The king, my lord, should know this, okay. So when we take this into consideration, Taurus, and especially the region of Aldebaran and the Hyades, become much more related to fertility, creativity, and here I'm going to make that consumption, the desire to consume that we see with the bull eating sustenance in the last slide. I'm going to make that case for it being much more cognitive. So what I have found is that strong Taurus in a chart, people are very, very curious. It's very intellectual. They want to learn. They want to go down the rabbit hole. Sometimes to the point where it's not useless. Sometimes they're so fixated on eating the information that they actually don't do anything with it. And they become, they can get a little bit of that, what's the word? Paralysis by analysis sometimes. Just becomes very, very like detail oriented. Now that's something that traditionally we would hear about with Virgo. And to an extent, there's some of that, but I'm telling you, Taurus, it's all over Taurus, you guys. So look into that one. Don't take any of the stuff I say at face value. Like, please, by all means, test it all out. Okay. Hopefully you guys are doing that. All right, let's go to the shepherd's crook here. I think that's next. Yes. All right, so I don't talk about this one so much in my readings. Normally when I'm talking about this portion of the sky, we kind of just overlap with Orion and Auriga, it's kind of similar. So I don't usually go into this. This is going to reapply. So we're not going to get to Pisces or, excuse me, Aries today, but we are going to talk about Dumuzid, who is listed as the regent of Aries or the hireling. So I just want you to kind of keep this in mind as we go. Okay. Yeah, I said that. All right, so with the crook, and anytime we're dealing with shepherds in astrology, we have a connection to the moon. He was considered the celestial shepherd or cowherd. I'm not going to go into too much detail. We'll talk more about the moon next time, but just know that there's always a lunar connection to any of these shepherds. Now, this shepherd in particular, which looks like a stick, but it was sometimes pictured as a man, he was Dumuzid the shepherd. He was the god of shepherds, vegetation, and milk, which there's another lunar connection there to the milk. He was the first and main consort of Inanna Ishtar, the planet embodied in Venus. In the late 3rd millennium BC, kings may have reenacted the sacred marriage between Dumuzid and Inanna during the spring equinox, bringing life and fertility to the land. Whether or not they had, literal intercourse or symbolic, we don't know. But considering how graphic the poetry about Inanna and Dumuzid are, I suspect that they probably just went for it. Now, his sister was Geshtin-Inanna, and she was a goddess of agriculture and dream interpretation. So we do get, anytime we see these strong sibling relationships, we do get a little bit, it's not, super dominant, but anytime we have Dumuzid, so this is going to show up in Aries, and also over here in this portion of the sky, we're going to get a little bit of that psychic ability, that dream interpretation and intuition stuff, little, on the mystical side. Let me see here. Okay, so in the descent of Inanna, As you'll recall, Inanna went to the underworld after Gugelana's death in the epic poem, but basically she eventually wants to leave. The Anuna gods, or the Anunnaki, if you prefer, seized her. They said, whoever has ascended from the underworld has ascended unscathed from the underworld, or they're asking, like, whoever gets out of it without, problems. If Inanna is to ascend from the underworld, let her provide a substitute for herself. So she returns from the underworld accompanied by the Gala demons, where she encounters mourners dressed in rags, which was what they all had to do when somebody died. We're going to talk more about that too when we talk about Cancer. So she's not going to allow these people, because they did the funerary rites appropriately. So she's not going to allow them to be taken back in her place. Then there was Dumuzid, clothed in magnificent garment. This is her husband, you guys. Clothed in magnificent garments and seated magnificently on a throne. The demon seized him there by his thighs. The 7 of them, there's always 7. Okay, you guys are going to see this repeated. The 7 are very scary in the Bible and Revelations, all the way from Old Testament to New Testament. Like, there's always a scary, scary 7, okay? The 7 of them poured the milk from his churns. The 7 of them shook their heads like something we don't know. They would not let the shepherd play the pipe or the flute before her. She looked at him. It was the look of death. She spoke to him. This is Inanna looking at him. It was the speech of anger. She shouted at him. It was the shout of heavy guilt. How much longer? Take him away. Holy Inanna gave Dumuzid the shepherd to their hands. Dumuzid let out a wail and turned very pale. The lad raised his hands to the heaven to Utu. Utu, you are my brother-in-law. I am your relation by marriage. I brought butter to your mother's house. I brought milk to Ningal's house. Turn my hands into snakes' hands and turn my feet into snakes' feet so that I can escape my demons. Let them not keep hold of me. This is a veiled Ophiuchus reference, I promise you, okay? So again, we're cluing you into stuff that's coming in later. Utu, the sun god, obliges, and he escapes the demons at first, but he's eventually recaptured. Then we're told Holy Inanna wept bitterly for her husband, so she felt really bad. A fly offered to tell her where he was, and Inanna goes to his sister. She came up to the sister and likely took her by the hand. We're not 100% sure. Now, alas, my husband, you for half of the year and your sister for the half of the year. When you are demanded on that day, you will stay in the underworld. When your sister is demanded on that day, you will be released. Then Holy Inanna gave Dumuzid a substitute. So this resulted in the cycles of the seasons. And when Dumuzid dies, so does the vegetation. This happens every year. This is very similar. I'm sure you guys are familiar with the myth of Persephone. Has to go to Hades. She eats the fruit and it's a whole thing for like half of the year. This myth, the descent of Inanna, is basically what that is based on. Oh, yes, I didn't mention that. Inanna actually descends into the underworld and is resurrected 3 days later. That's like another one of those things where it's very clear that this is where we're getting it from. Okay, so when we take all this into consideration, the crook becomes associated with kingship, leadership, guardianship, paternal energy, youth, vitality, fertility, folly. We can say, youthful folly, sacrifice, and rebirth. Now, in this portion of the sky, this is right above, this is this void place between Taurus and, I don't know if I'm backwards over here, but between Taurus and Gemini, there's like a big open space, and then the crook is going to be above that. And then right below it is going to be Orion, which is the true shepherd of Anu. Okay, let me see here. All right, so like I said before, this little guy here, which is now Orion, he could either be male or female, depending on the situation. Both of them were, they were attendants of higher level gods. So Papshakal, in his masculine form, was an attendant of Anu. He was the protector of the seat or throne of Anu. And although in earlier periods, he was the attendant of Zababa, who, why do I have Orion in here? That's Ophiuchus, who we're going to talk about Ophiuchus later, and that's Zababa. So if you hear that, that's what that is. At different times, he was called the son of Anu or Zababa, and he was depicted with a stick and a walking bird. It's now a little rooster. There is a constellation known as the rooster, but the rooster himself too was a messenger. We won't get into that. His rituals included helping with door troubles, which sounds strange until you consider that his wife's name, Ninkagal, can translate as Lady of the Gate or Lady of the Doorstep. Now, you'll also notice the same thing with Gemini. These people are acting as guardians to the gate to the underworld in Cancer. So we still get some of this protective energy in this kind of like acting as a higher spiritual guard to not just the underworld, but like the mysteries and like the secrets of the universe and stuff. Now, in this feminine guise, this was Ninshibur, and her name translates as Lady as Servants. She was the attendant goddess of Inanna. So from Inanna's descent, the one that we were just talking about, this is before she actually goes to the underworld. Inanna traveled towards the underworld. Her minister, Ninshibura, traveled behind her. Holy Inanna said to Ninshibura, "Come, my faithful minister of Eanna." That was her temple. "My minister who speaks fair words, my escort who speaks trustworthy words. On this day I will descend to the underworld. When I have arrived in the underworld, make a lament for me on the ruined mounds. Beat the drum for me in the sanctuary. Make the rounds of heaven, the rounds of the houses of the gods for me. Lacerate your eyes for me. Lacerate your nose for me. Lacerate your ears for me in public. In private, lacerate your buttocks for me. Like a pauper, clothe yourself in a single garment, and all alone, set your foot in the Echor, the house of Enlil. That was this big temple. Lament before Enlil, saying, Father Enlil, don't let anyone kill your daughter in the underworld. If Enlil doesn't help you in this matter, do the same thing for Nana. If that doesn't work, do the same thing. I'm paraphrasing. To Lord Enki. Father Enki, the Lord of great wisdom, who is the god in the constellation of Aquarius, you guys. Father Enki, the Lord of great wisdom, knows about the life-giving plant and the life-giving water. He is the one who will restore me to life. Okay, so a few things going on in here. Lacerate your various body parts is very serious, which is why Demuzid, like that was a big deal for him to just be sitting on his throne dressed all nice. He's supposed to be in rags and he's supposed to be like beating himself. When we talk about Cancer here in a minute, all of these very serious lamentation rituals and mourning rituals that they're doing, it's coming for a very specific reason. We hopefully will have time to get into it. I think we will, but I'll just give you the long and short of it. Basically, they were trying to prevent ghosts. So if you weren't doing all the right rituals for the dead, they were going to come back and they were going to haunt you. They were going to make you sick. Like this goes, this whole theme goes all the way back to, goes over to Asia. It's in South America. Pretty much everywhere you go, there's this idea that like if you don't have proper burials, you're not feeding your dead, you're not worshiping your ancestors even long after they've died, that like something bad's going to happen. And this is really going to speak to, again, our underworld associations and our Cancer and to some extent Leo, but also very much so Gemini. So let me see. So Ninshabur's efforts are the reason that Inanna is eventually able to return from the underworld. And when the Gala demons try to take her, Inanna steps in. She's like, no, you can't have her. She did all this stuff right? So as we discussed in the Crook, shepherds were associated with kingship and protection as well as agriculture. It's worth noting that this guy right here, his name, Sipa Ziana, means true shepherd of Anu. The word Z can mean true, righteous, upright, faithful, all of those things. So, well, I'll tell you what that means in a second. So when we take this into consideration with the fact that the attendants of the gods act as both their messengers and the intercessors between the gods and humankind, the mythological astrological associations of Orion become divine service, messengers, intercession, divine intercession, but just any kind, really. Following instructions, truth, justice, righteousness, correct action, shepherdship, protection, self-sacrifice. I have found that people, and you're only really going to get the tip over here when you see like usually it's the moon that gets far enough down past the ecliptic to get into Orion. But a strong Orion in a chart, and you will see it on the horizon in the ascendant or the descendant for sure. It ends up being like reluctant leadership. People who have to step into a higher leadership position throughout life, a lot of times they don't want to do it. They're good people. They don't have a tolerance for wickedness or corruption, but life keeps trying to push them into this leadership position. So it's definitely something that you want to let people know about when they have it. It can also mean having to kind of make some sacrifices and also not fully fitting in with other people. It can make people kind of be a little bit on the outside because even though you have to lead, you can't lead from within the group. You have to kind of be a little bit on the outside. Does that make sense? Okay. So let's go into the Great Twins. All right. So again, we can suppose that the regent here is Nergal for very obvious reasons, because the Great Twins are named as Lugalira and Meshlim Tai. And again, this is all Mars. These are all Mars connections. Oh, my cats are like tripping out. Okay. So this constellation depicts a pair of soldiers guarding one of the celestial entrances to the underworld. So Cancer rose during the midsummer, which was the hot, dead, dry period. The other entrance to the underworld is going to be at midwinter, and that's going to be around like the Sagittarius time period, as you guys are aware. So these two here are ensuring safe passage of souls and prevention of demons from escaping the underworld. There were like 7 doormen of the underworld, and it was a whole process. So like when Inanna went to the underworld, she had to keep taking stuff off, and they kept hanging up her coats, they hung up her powers, her dresses, her jewelry, all of the things that made her have any power. So it's a whole process of stripping down, as we'll see. Now, it's not clear if the twins are actual brothers or just a pair of soldiers, but even if they aren't brothers, they're sharing a familial bond. After, a pair of warriors or soldiers, they're in the foxhole, they're going to war, they develop this deeper bond with each other. The name Lugalira means mighty king, and Meshlam Tai means one who has arisen from the underworld. These are both epithets for Nergal, the god of the underworld, death and pestilence, and embodied in the planet Mars. You're going to hear me say this over and over again so that it's just easier to remember. He was believed to have descended into the underworld in the midsummer and returns in the midwinter. So he's also all these dying gods is what they call them. They spend like half the year in the underworld and half in the rest of the world. Okay. His consort was Eresh Kigal, queen of the underworld. However, in earlier times, he might have had different ones. They were associated with either frost or medicine. There is a healing aspect to Mars that you don't hear about quite as much, but we'll talk about that later. He had the power to decree the fates of the dead, just as his father Enlil decreed the fates of the living. He was called Lugal Selimma, which means king of peace, as he was so terrifying to his enemies, they would rather just not go to battle and go to war and just stay home and be peaceful than have to go fight him. His rituals could protect one from evil and demons and compel demons and ghosts to return to the underworld. His Babylonian counterpart, Era, Nergal Era is how I usually say it because it's basically the same person, were embodied in Mars. Now, he does have some solar traits. He was often depicted with a lion's head or having shaggy mane or lion's claws. And he also has a lion-headed mace. Now, for obvious reasons, lion manes were associated with rays of the sun. Nergal ruled over the hottest, brightest time of the year, the hot, dry summer months, and that was the season of death, pestilence, and disease. So not like warm and fuzzy. That's when the rest of us, like Europeans and North America, like we're all having fun. This is like the scary time in Mesopotamia. So some have made the comparison with the hot summer and the noonday sun with Nergal, while others point out his association with sunset, the sun passing into the underworld, basically the dying sun. As the great twins, Gemini represent, this flew at me. What was I saying? Gemini would have, no, I said that. Sorry, I wasn't expecting to get like hit by something. I think my air conditioner threw something at me. As the great twins, Gemini represents Nergal in his protective guise as Lord of the Underworld. Omens surrounding Gemini are generally bad and for the most part relate to pestilence and just not goodness, okay? So if a strange star, that's Mars, they call it the strange star, comes close to Gemini, the king will die and there will be hostility. Now, Mars comes close to Gemini pretty often. Kings aren't just dying, dropping dead all the time, which is why some of the Babylonian omens are very silly, but we still use them to get insight into what they really thought the planet and constellation were doing. The twins in general, unless it was an animal that was supposed to normally have twins, like goats would have twins, like birthing twins was not a good sign. If a cow gives birth to twins, destruction of the land, fighting, the enemy will attack the prince and the house of the cow will be scattered. Gemini would have risen during the late spring, early summer, when the hot season of death was just getting underway. Thus, it represents the rise of Nergal's power. And to illustrate what else this could mean, let's look at how Nergal came to power. Mars, in my opinion, is one of the planets that gets the worst, it really kind of gets a bad rap. There's really wonderful, powerful things in there that most people don't see. They don't want to look past just the blatant negativity. So I am going to go through this with you. We're going to knock out what Mars is all about anyways with the planet in here. Now, Eresh Kigal, queen of the underworld, was unable to go to the celestial realm to have a banquet with the gods. So she sends her messenger. So again, with the true shepherd, whenever we have one of these intermediaries, they're basically the stand-in for the god. So you can't insult them, okay? So when the messenger gets to the banquet, Nergal refuses to stand. When Eresh Kigal finds out, she demands the offender be brought to her so she can kill him. So the messenger goes to Anu. He's like, you have to, send to me whoever it was. Well, Nergal's there and he disguised himself as this bald man, which was like a sign of weakness, I guess. He was like gimpy and stuff. He was just pretending. This is really important because he's clearly afraid, okay? Understand that Nergal was an unmatched warrior. There was a Nana and there was Nergal. She was like the biggest badass of the women, and he was the biggest one of the men. No questions, nobody had any doubt. So for him to go and be hiding in the background, pretending to be someone else, really speaks to either the fact that Eresh Kigal was super scary, or he was, way deep down, he's a big wuss. He's a big ball of squishy, spongy material. Okay, or just normal. Maybe he was just a normal person in there. Okay. In one version of the story, it actually says that when he's told, like, no, you have to go down there and apologize to her, that he wept out of fear. So again, this is Mars, this is the god of war, and he's like now been rendered like a crying, shaking wuss. All right. So Nergal finally gets to the underworld. She, Ereshkigal, went to the bathing chamber. She put on some sort of garments. She let him see her body. He became aroused as a man for a woman. They embraced one another. Passionately, they went to bed. One day, a second day, they lay Queen Ereshkigal and Era. A fifth day, a sixth day, they lay. When the seventh day came, Nergal, we assume he apologized for not being present in heaven, or apologized to her for what he had done, and then said he's not in the celestial sphere, he's got to go back. So not wanting to stay in the underworld, he convinces her to let him go. He says, release me, sister. Do not make a fuss at my going. I must go from the land of no return. Ereshkigal is heartbroken. She's sobbing uncontrollably, and she commands her messenger, Namtar, whose name also means disease and pestilence, which is kind of weird, to go to Anu Enlil and say, I know this is graphic, you guys, but I have to, I'm going to read it. So hopefully we can all be mature here. I think you're all over 18. We should be able to read some ancient literature. Since I was a young girl, I have not known the play of maidens, nor have I known the frolic of little girls. The God whom you sent to me, he has had intercourse with me, so let him lie with me. Send me that God, that he may be my husband and spend the night with me. I am defiled, impure. I think that's a poor translation. I think he's just trying to say he took her virginity. I cannot render judgments for the great gods because she's so distraught, because she's totally heartbroken. The great gods who reside in the netherworld, if you do not send that God according to the authority of the netherworld, in the great netherworld, I shall rise up the dead to devour the living. I shall make the dead outnumber the living. So zombie apocalypse if Nergal doesn't come back, which is pretty serious stuff. So the message is delivered, and as it turns out, once again, Nergal is hiding. He has disguised himself so he doesn't have to go back. Okay, so we don't know why exactly. It doesn't say, because again, he's like the baddest of the bad. The lines are kind of broken. We don't know exactly what Ea, who is Enki, tells Nergal, but basically it's all summed up as, all the authority of the great netherworld shall I grant you if you go to the underworld and kill Ereshkigal. Once again, this is another, if you guys remember from what we talked about with the Pleiades, he gets talked into going to battle. They massaged his ego. Didn't it feel great to go to war and just totally slaughter people? Wasn't that so much more fun than sitting around like a lisping child and an old man? He's like, yeah, that's great. Here again, somebody's telling him, hey, I'll give you all this power if you just go and, you go and kill her. So it's not it's his decision, right? But he's getting coaxed into it. Okay, so he readied his bow and set off to the underworld. He entered her broad court, approached her, and burst out laughing. He seized her by the hair. Now, this is basically, he's taking his hand or her hair. He's not necessarily ripping it, okay? He pulled her from the throne and seized her by her locks. Something, the text is mutilated, we don't know, and it says his arousal. They embraced one another. Passionately, they went to bed. One day, a second day, they lay, Queen Ereshkigal and Era. A third day, they lay, and this goes all the way to the seventh day. A seventh day, they lay. Anu sends his messenger to the underworld, the house of Ereshkigal, who dwells in the netherworld, saying, that God whom I sent to you, let him dwell with you forever. So as we saw in the Era epic, he's getting goaded into it. When he gets to the underworld, he actually remembers, this lady's doing it for me, right? You are going to hear, as we talk more about these other constellations, about the very numerous and erotic exploits of all of these other gods. So despite everything, despite him being the warrior unmatched, he lives happily ever after as the Lord of the Underworld and has this extremely stable relationship with his consort. And they're basically it's a perfect situation, and everything just totally falls into place. Now, when we take all this into consideration, Era, Nergal, and the planet Mars, and his images, and thus, in this respect, it's going to be Gemini too. We're going to get an association with brothers, siblings, fraternal bonds, protection, emotion, sensitivity, fear, lust, vulnerability, higher emotions relating to love, including despair, and heartbreak, the good stuff and the bad stuff. Obviously, we're going to, the guardians of the underworld are going to represent emotional protection we put around ourselves. And as we see in this myth, Nergal keeps he's trying to protect himself from all those fears that he has inside of him, all of those really deep emotions. Yeah, so he has a fear of being vulnerable. But when you get down to it, he's extremely vulnerable, and he's able to make this very intimate connection with this other person that is lasting and, ends up being very powerful. So eventually everybody's guard has to come down, and it's going to lay bare whatever's beneath. And to a large extent, Gemini and Cancer and a Mars, and a little bit Leo are all going to relate to some of these things. Okay. Do you guys want to do Cancer before we stop? Do you guys want to do one more? Should we wrap up the underworld stuff? Yes? No? Okay, let's do it. I don't know what you guys are saying. I'm seeing heads wobbling in different directions, so we're just going to run with this. Okay. All right. There's no evidence that this constellation ever depicted a crab. Al-Lul literally means deceptive digger. The Lul sign depicts little like spades things, like the cuneiform sign. And the alternative Akkadian writing is Kushu, which can mean water creature or literally snapping turtle. Okay. Omens about the crab, regardless, they relate to a lot of times flood, water levels, as well as long life and death. So an example would be if Cancer is dark, which can mean that Saturn's in it or different things. A ghost of a wronged person will seize the land and there will be deaths in the land. If the moon is surrounded by a halo and Cancer stands in it, the king of Akkad will extend the life. In the story of Enki and the turtle, which is the most famous turtle in ancient mythology, at least Mesopotamian mythology, we're told of Ninurta, who is embodied in Saturn, you guys. So when we talk about Ninurta, we're talking about Saturn. The hero Ninurta set his sights on the whole world. He told no one and inwardly did not, he didn't talk about it, think about it. The great Lord Enki, who is embodied in Aquarius or written in Aquarius, intuitively grasped the substance of his plan. So he was using his psychic powers, hint, hint, okay? In the shrine in the Absu, he stirred up a dark flood storm. Against Ninurta, Enki fashioned a turtle from the clay of the Absu. Against him, he stationed the turtle at the opening at the gate of the Absu. So the Absu was the abyss of fresh water. It's also the underworld. There were like two parts. They had like the Absus, like aquifers and fresh water, under the ground. And then they had like the underworld that was beneath that. Either way, we still see the turtle, the original turtle, being stationed at the entrance to this underworld, okay? All right. Enki talked, Enki talked to him near the place of the ambush and brought him to the place where the turtle was. The turtle was able to grab Ninurta's tendon from behind. The hero Ninurta managed to turn back its feet. Enki, as if perplexed, said, "What is this?" He had the turtle scrape the ground with its claws, had him dig an evil pit. The hero Ninurta fell into it with the turtle. The hero did not know how to get out from the pit. The turtle kept gnawing at his feet with his claws. The great Lord Enki said to him, from something we don't know, "You set your mind to kill me, something, who makes big claims. I cut down, I raise up. You who set your sights on me like this, what has your position seized for you? How? Something. Where has your strength fled? Where is your heroism? In the great mountains you caused destruction, but how will you get out now?" Ninmena, who's another goddess, learned of the situation. She ripped the clothes on her body and she says, "You, my plant eater Enki, who shall I send to you? Men will shake their heads in fear. Who shall I send to you? That name is not Enki. That name is Ugugu that does not pour. You who are death, which has no mercy. Who shall I send to you?" Okay. So in this story, we see that the heroic Ninurta has set his sights on the entire world, likely out of hubris, very much like something Nergal in Mars would do, okay? He's in the Era epic, I didn't talk about it yet, but he actually tries to usurp Marduk's throne too. That's basically like the whole conversation about disturbing the orbits and causing the deluge. We'll talk about that later. Bless you. Sorry, I saw Nikki's sneeze. Okay. Sensing his plans through his psychic abilities, Enki, lord of the watery underworld, fashions a turtle to act as his proxy, as they do, and stations the deceptive digger at the gates of the abyss, which we talked about. The turtle digs a pit and pulls Ninurta down by his heel. The story is probably the precursor to Achilles, with, his one weakness being his heel. He gets dipped in the river Styx, and you guys know that story, right? Maybe? Okay. While we don't know what happened to Ninurta, we do know that Enki here is called Death Which Has No Mercy. Now, while Enki himself is a benevolent god of fertility and creation, like purely benevolent, you guys, when it comes to him and his turtle in this dark, scary, secretive portion of the sky, he takes on a very dark role, indicating that everyone, even the benevolent, wise Enki, is capable of anger, rage, and arguably evil. Okay, now he was doing it to protect the gifts of civilization and everything, but he definitely took on some really dark traits here in the region of Cancer. So what we know about Cancer was, we talked about this being one of the access points to the underworld. There's a connection to this point where the souls of the dead ancestors, as well as souls of infants who are coming out of the underworld to be born, a hint towards reincarnation, you guys. We're going to talk more about that later. There's also a lot of Cancer, like in the constellation of Cancer, and also crab magic that allowed for compelling and commanding ghosts. Death rites of Dumuzid were celebrated during Cancer's month, like when it was rising on the eastern horizon. And ancestors during that time were invited back to visit, just like they are in other cultures like Halloween and, Day of the Dead and everything. A little more on the underworld. The Mesopotamian underworld went by many names, including Kur and Kigal, mountain, great earth, and place, which is why, by the way, Zecharia Sitchin argues that the underworld is not, it's actually, he thinks it's Africa, which I mean, it might be, I don't know. But it's not, they don't necessarily know that it's, some deep, dark place underground. We infer quite a bit. It was said that it was located beneath the earth, beneath the watery, fresh water abyss. Now there, the souls of the dead continued to exist much as they had in life, only without food and drink, which was why they were offered libations. So you had to keep giving them food and water. Now, I personally believe that this was a clever way to ensure people had as many babies as possible, because the more children you had, the more grandchildren you had, the more likely they would be to continue to provide you with libations, which is also going to prevent you from wandering around as a thirsty ghost, which again is a common, theme found throughout the world. So the idea of burying the dead with items that they could use to garner favors in the afterlife gave rise to this idea that the afterlife is just like super materialistic. Like they just want your stuff. You got to bury them with the money and everything so they can bribe the, otherworld officials. Again, this is people creating an idea of what the underworld was actually like. So basically they knew at some point in the past, they knew that if we don't treat these dead bodies correctly, we're going to get haunted. Okay. We don't want haunted. So let's just do nice stuff for them. Let's take care of them like we would if they were really our house guests and, being here. And somehow after that, they were like, well, if they need food and water, they must be really thirsty. Okay. So this not necessarily that on a spiritual or cosmological level, they really thought those things. They just kind of developed in tandem. But the one thing that they did know was that crabs, Cancer, the time of death, the season of death, when the veil was thinnest, this was a time of ghosts, and we don't mess around with the ghosts. Okay. This is something that you will never hear being, like nobody's going to beat this drum outside of this because they just don't care. But they were really freaked out about spirits and paranormal activity and stuff. Okay. And it completely shaped their concept of the universe. Yes. Okay. All right. So the Mesopotamian underworld didn't have a reward punishment system, supposedly. No matter how good or evil you were, you went to the same place. But this doesn't make sense because we're also told that Nergal, Utu, and some of the other gods, Nana, even the moon god, would judge the dead. So like they don't know, they can't say why that is. We have a lot of conflicting information about the underworld. In some texts, we're told that it's utterly dark and dusty, while in others, we're told that the sun god who dwells there at night illuminates it like the daytime. Same thing with the moon. He goes there and it's, lit up like the nighttime. We can maybe infer that the other celestial bodies also went into the underworld. We don't know for sure. We're also told, like scholars tell us, that it's this barren world without food, and generally it's pretty miserable. But in other cases, they're having banquets and parties, and they're like having a super good time, and it seems pretty nice. Okay, so it really just depends on who you're talking to. We're also told that nothing grows there, despite the fact that there's a garden of the sun god, and it's full of trees that bear precious gems as fruit. And in one Sumerian hymn, a very famous one, an important one in mythology, Inanna, Venus, and Utu, the sun, Inanna begs Utu to take her to Kur, the underworld, so that she can taste the fruit of the tree which grows there. Does this sound familiar? Which will reveal all of the secrets of sex, which sounds reminiscent of the tree in the Garden of Eden, and many scholars believe that this is the basis of that story. She does go there, she eats it, and that's how she becomes like the master of all the sex knowledge, okay? So what's really going on with the underworld? We need to know if we're going to talk about Cancer, who is in the place of the access point to the underworld. I assert that the Mesopotamian underworld is an amalgamation of various superstitions regarding death, which I definitely talked about. In secular context, we can see the correlation between the underworld, which is dark, terrifying, and full of demons, as well as secret knowledge and beauty, and thus the inner world of the ego, the subjective mind, the identity, and basically where we're bearing all of our demons, our skeletons, our scary stuff, where we have to go, if you want to go down there, you have to do the same thing Inanna does in the Descent of Inanna. She's got to take off all those layers. She has to keep stripping down until there's nothing left. She's bare naked and basically just like a husk of a corpse. And they actually eventually hang her body up on the wall too. And she just becomes like she's completely stripped down. So that's when we're talking about the underworld, we're talking about going into that deep, dark place. And you will see this whenever you see Mars associations to an extent. Also a little bit with Gemini. And again, a tiny bit with Leo. We'll even get some of this when we talk about Sagittarius that, is over there on the other side of the underworld. But this is definitely the darker side. Finally, it's worth noting that the Mullah pin calls the crab Anu's dwelling. So if you remember, Anu is the supreme deity. That makes this, if this is his dwelling, they're saying that the supreme celestial deity also lives in the underworld. I do think this is a very colorful way to explain that, as above, so below. The internal and the external are basically like the same. So when you go way deep down, go all the way to the underworld, that's when you access the cosmos, the celestial. And we can see that mirrored in actual, real life. So our astrological associations become death, darkness, the underworld, the inner world, secret knowledge, facing one's fears, succumbing to hubris. In the case of Ninurta, he's definitely dealing with some, he got in over his head a little bit. Being laid bare or stripped naked, figuratively or otherwise. And also magic, commanding of spirits. I will challenge you guys to do two things when you are looking at Cancer in your charts. One, look for mediumship traits in people who have a different connection to the spirit world, because it's definitely different, okay? It depends on what planet's there, but there's definitely something going on. The other thing I will tell you is look harder at these intellectual traits or cognitive traits. This is the subjective mind, okay? So when we're looking at Mercury, Taurus, like we talked about, there being like this cognitive desire, this is really about eating information and processing it, and it's very unbiased. This Cancer energy is much more subjective. It's all about the self, trying to understand who you are in space and time. And in that respect, it's that loop going on inside of your mind. Sometimes it causes a lot of anxiety. Usually people who have, who are just prone to anxiety, or they're just like overthinking, hyper analyzing, they're like picking things apart to a very detrimental and destructive degree, usually have something going on with Mars, or they have like really strong Cancer. Now, it doesn't always turn out that way. It's gonna, but they're set up for it if the conditions are right. So it's something that I would challenge you to look at in your, your analysis and see if you find something similar to that and see what you can do with it.